China is accusing East Africa's largest economy of defaulting on its debt repayments for the financing of the Standard Gauge rail line from Mombasa to Naivasha. Now, Chinese banks reportedly fined Kenya 1.312 billion shillings, in the year ended June, according to documents seen by local media. The Export-Import Bank of China led the consortium that funded the construction of the SGR line. The Kenyan Treasury on Thursday says it has no knowledge of any official statements indicating that Chinese lenders have penalized the country for delayed payments of loans provided to build the railway. Kenya's Treasury Secretary Ukur Yatani maintained that Kenya has not defaulted on its public debt, arguing that the country has not accumulated repayment arrears for decades. Joining me now from Nairobi is Dr. Xen Iraki, economist and also a member of faculty at the University of Nairobi. Dr. Iraki, so there's obviously some confusion as to whether or not China has fined Kenya, but what we are hearing from local media is that this is what has happened. But this presupposes that Kenya defaulted on some of these loans. So what do we know about the state of the loans for the SGR line?
Good morning. The issue of Chinese debt has been in the media for quite some time. The money was used to build the railway line from Mombasa to Nairobi, then to Naivasha. And then recently there was a report in one of the dailies that China has fined Kenya some money because of defaulting. But the government came out and denied that there has not been such a thing. So we don't know what is the truth, but it is unlikely that even if the loan was defaulted, the government would go publicly and say that the loan has been defaulted. That would set the record of the government in Chelsea, that our debt rating would go down. So until we get the truth from all the sources, including the credit rating agencies, for now we can believe that Kenya has not defaulted on any of the loans until it is made official.
Okay, so let's look at this project in itself. Now, the Mombasa to Naivasha Standard Gauge Railway operations posted an operational loss of some 3.4 billion Kenyan shillings and wired about 22.7 billion Kenyan shillings in loan repayments in the year to June. At this point, this project is not yet paying for itself. So how long do you think it would take for this project to, say, break even? How long would it even take to repay this loan if we're taking the conversation around the default or the fine off the table?
That is a very interesting question because when the railway line was finished, the government came up with a directive telling most of the transporters from Mombasa to Nairobi, Naivasha, to use nothing else but the railway line. And that would have made it easy for the railway line to pay for itself. But when we got the new president, he said the transporters are free to use the road, to use the railway line, the new railway line or the old railway line. So the SGR or the Standard Rail Gauge is now going to compete with any other means of transport. And that probably will take it longer for the railway to pay for itself. What I think is that soon the government is going to give people incentives to use it so that it's going to take a shorter time to pay for the railway line. But for now, it is making some loss and the government will be very eager to break even because it is a lot of money and that is being expensive as road and also in terms of paying the original amount that was borrowed. So we expect a lot of competition, but I think the government will do something about it.
Okay. So the Treasury Secretary says Kenya has not defaulted on its public debts and that Kenya has not accumulated any repayment arrears in decades. So this is not just a conversation about this SGR line, because the conversation about debts, the Africa situation, how much Africa owes China, how much Kenya owes China is a continuous one. How much does Kenya really owe China aside from this SGR loan?
I don't have the figures in mind, but what I know is that China is one of the biggest lenders to the Chinese. So that one I know, but I don't have the figure in mind. And one of the issues that came during the campaign as we were looking for the new president was actually how to deal with the debt that Kenya has accumulated for the last several years. It is interesting that despite that, there was a motion in Parliament to try and raise the debt ceiling from the current 9 trillion to something more so that the government can be able to maneuver itself as far as finance is concerned. Remember that to finance the government projects, you have to either borrow money or raise taxes. And we don't have enough revenue from taxes. So in the short run, I see the government borrowing more, but there will be a very big debate which will come out with ways and means of reducing Kenya's reliance on debt. And one of them has been proposed as setting some of the government parastat organizations so that the money raised from the stock exchange can be used to fund some of the government projects.
So when you look at the fact that Kenyan lawmakers have raised the borrowing limits, what do you make of that? You mentioned that just now. Is that really the best thing that can be done for Kenya at this point in time?
I don't think raising the debt ceiling is the best approach to dealing with our financial problems, because if you raise it to 12 trillion, somebody will come and say 14 trillion, 15 trillion. I think what the government needs to do is look at the problems head on, maybe look for ways and means of raising the tax revenues, and very important, look for ways and means of reducing some of the waste that we find in the public expenditure. So I think debt is the most palatable, the easiest to raise, but not the best. We need to come up with other means to reduce the debt, so that in the long run, we use less of the government revenues to pay for debt, but use it for development purposes.
All right. And finally, Dr. Iraki, Kenya's debt level surged to 9 trillion Kenyan shillings. That's about $75.7 billion, around 67% of the country's GDP, from just 2 trillion or 40% of the GDP a few short years ago. And when you look at what Kenya has taken the loans out for, there are often questions as to whether or not these borrowings are justified and if these projects are financially able to pay for themselves. Now, Kenya is also one of the African countries that's being flagged for being in debt distress with the potential of defaulting on its loans. How possible do you think it is that Kenya could sometime in the future default on its loans?
I think that on the first question, the people who took the loans, the previous government argued that the money was being used to improve on the productive capacity of the economy, build roads, build railways, build ports. And I think it's a good investment. But what we cannot tell is whether it was good for the money, because sometimes it takes years, maybe 40, 50 years, sometimes to see the returns of investment. If you look at the new superhighway system, it probably took time for people to start seeing the system. So we still need to be patient to see that. But on the issue of Kenya defaulting, I don't think that is going to happen for the new government. The old government were very conscious of that fact, and they're coming up with ways and means of making sure that we don't default. I think that would be the worst that could happen to our government, to our debt. That would be one of the bad. In fact, our investors, our debtors, our readers would be very unhappy with that. And I don't think the government, under any circumstances, would allow that to happen. I think the government is working very hard to make sure that does not happen. But I'm not talking on behalf of the government.
All right, Dr. Iraki, we definitely understand your point. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the network.
That's all, no problem.